On the morning of June 30th, 2009, a maintenance worker arrived at the Kingston Mills locks on the Rideau Canal, east of Kingston, Ontario. The locks had not yet opened for the day's boat traffic. Something was wrong with the water level in one of the chambers. Looking down into the dark water, the worker saw the roof of a car. Divers were called. What they found inside was 4 people, all female, all dead. Police and forensic investigators arrived and began to look for the story the scene could tell. What they found did not point to an accident. There were no skid marks on the bank. There was no mud trail suggesting a car had rolled slowly in. The Nissan Sentra's left rear taillight was broken, and the pieces were not in the water. They were on the ground above the lock, near a section of concrete where tire marks and paint transfer suggested another vehicle had been positioned. That second vehicle, a black Lexus SUV, was registered to a man named Mohammad Shafia. His family had stayed at a motel less than 2 kilometers away the night before. The 4 women in the car were 3 of his daughters and his first wife. He had driven away that morning without reporting them missing. Within 23 days, Mohammad Shafia, his second wife, Tooba Muhammad Yahya, and their son Hamed would be arrested for all war murders. This is the story of the 4 women they killed. Their names were Rona, Zainab, Sahar, and Geeti. And this is the story of every system that had a chance to save them and did nothing. Mohammad Shafia was born in Afghanistan. By the time his family settled in Montreal in 2007, he had spent decades building wealth across multiple countries: real estate in Afghanistan and Dubai, businesses in Australia. He was, by every external measure, a success. He was respected within Montreal's Afghan community. He presented himself as a devout patriarch, a provider, a man of standing. The internal reality of his household was entirely different. In Afghan custom, Mohammad had married twice. His first wife, Rona Amir Mohammad, had been with him since 1978. She was intelligent, quietly religious, deeply devoted to the children she had helped raise, because the marriage had produced none of her own. Medical tests confirmed Rona could not conceive. It was Rona herself, sources close to the family said, who suggested Mohammad take a second wife, a sacrifice made according to custom, and perhaps with the hope that it would secure her place in the household. It did not. Mohammad married Tooba Muhammad Yahya in 1988. Tooba would have 7 children with Shafia. Rona remained in the home, but her status had collapsed. Tooba, who would later stand in a Kingston courtroom convicted of murder, was reported to have told Rona directly, "You are a slave. You are a servant." Rona accepted this, outwardly, but she kept a diary. In its pages, she documented what her life had become: the fear, the subordination, the sense of a threat she could not fully name, but felt building around her. The family presented Rona to the outside world as the children's aunt. To Canadian authorities, she barely existed. She had entered Canada on a visitor's visa. The renewal of that visa was controlled by Mohammad. Her passport was in his possession. She could not travel to countries where she had family. She was a bibi. In every practical sense, a prisoner inside the family's Montreal home. She had no legal status. She had no freedom of movement. And she had no one on the outside who knew what was happening. Zainab Shafia was 19. Sahar was 17. Geeti was 13. They had grown up across several countries, born in Afghanistan, raised partly in Pakistan, Australia, and Dubai before landing in Montreal. They were doing what immigrant children everywhere do. They were adapting. They were learning French and English. They were making friends at school. They were wearing jeans and listening to music, and forming the kind of social lives that teenagers build. To their father, this adaptation was apostasy. Zainab, the eldest, had a boyfriend. He was a young Pakistani-Canadian man she had met at school. This was the offense. A boyfriend. For having a boyfriend, Zainab Shafia was forbidden to attend school for an entire year. Pulled from the classroom, isolated at home, while her father conducted what amounted to a punishment regime. When she returned to school, she confided in a guidance counselor about the control her family exercised over her. The counselor noted it. Nothing more happened. Sahar, the middle daughter, had her own Canadian life that her parents wanted to destroy. She had a Christian boyfriend. She had photographs on her phone, herself in a short skirt, smiling with her boyfriend, living the life of a 17-year-old girl in Montreal. When those photos were found, the response inside the household was severe. Sahar, like Zainab, reached out to people outside the family. She too was not removed from the home. And then there was Geeti, 13 years old, the youngest of the three sisters. Geeti was failing classes, regularly absent, becoming, in the words of teachers and administrators, difficult to manage. But Geeti was not a troubled teenager. Geeti was a desperate one. Multiple times, in documented, recorded interactions, Geeti Shafia told school officials and social workers that she wanted to be placed in foster care. She said she did not want to go home. She said she was afraid. Ontario's child welfare system had multiple documented points of contact with this 13-year-old girl. No removal was ordered. No emergency intervention was triggered. Each time, Geeti was returned to the home where her father was planning to kill her. On June 23, 2009, the Shafia family left Montreal on a family vacation. 10 people, 2 vehicles, a black Nissan Sentra and a black Lexus SUV. They drove to Niagara Falls, Ontario, staying at an area motel for several nights, taking in the tourist sites. On the surface, a family holiday. On June 29th, at approximately 8 p.m., the family began the drive back toward Montreal. They stopped near Kingston because Tooba said she was feeling unwell. The family pulled into the Kingston East KOA motel. They checked in for the night. Hamed and Mohammad, driving the Lexus, went ahead to find the motel and arrange rooms. The women, Rona, Zainab, Sahar, and Geeti, were in the Nissan. Investigators would later establish that at 1:36 a.m. on June 30th, Sahar's cell phone pinged a cell tower adjacent to Kingston Mills locks. That tower, that lock, the one where the car was found in the water at dawn. Prosecutors argued that the 4 women were murdered at the locks that night, driven there or taken there while the family was supposedly settling in at the motel, and that the car was pushed into the water, possibly using the Lexus SUV as the instrument of force. Broken headlight fragments from the Lexus were found near the lock that night. Paint transfer on the Nissan was consistent with having been struck from behind. The Crown's theory was methodical and specific. This was not an accident. It was not a spontaneous act of violence. It was a plan that had been discussed, rehearsed, and carried out during a family vacation that was designed, at least in part, to create an opportunity. Kingston police initially investigated the deaths as a possible accident. The canal lock was an unusual location, but accidents happen. Cars slip into water. It was in the first hours, treated with the caution that any unexplained death demands, not yet the certainty of homicide. But the physical evidence did not support an accident. The missing skid marks, the headlight fragments on the ground, not in the water, the paint transfer on the Nissan. And then there were the interviews. Police spoke to the Shafia family members. Mohammad and Tooba answered questions through an interpreter. Their accounts of the night had inconsistencies. Detectives noted that neither expressed the raw shock that investigators typically observe in parents confronted with the sudden violent deaths of their children. Within weeks, Kingston police obtained judicial authorization for wiretaps on the family's communications. What they recorded would become the most damning evidence in the case. Not forensic, not expert, but in Mohammad Shafia's, his own voice. Investigators also obtained records from a laptop computer used by Mohammad Shafia. In the days before the murders, someone using that laptop had conducted Google searches for locations with bodies of water, where to commit a murder, and searched maps of the Kingston area, focusing on the Kingston Mills road corridor, the exact road that runs past the locks where the bodies were found. Mohammad Shafia was 20 years old. He had been driving the second vehicle on the night of June 29th. He was the one who had gone ahead with his father to find the motel. And his laptop contained, in its browser history, the blueprint of what happened that night. When the wiretap recordings were played in court during the Undone trial, the courtroom went quiet. Mohammad Shafia believed his phone was not monitored. He was wrong. In conversation after conversation, recorded weeks and months after his daughters and first wife were pulled from a canal, Mohammad Shafia spoke about them without grief. He spoke about them with contempt. In translated excerpts from Dari, he called his daughters treacherous. He called them whores. He invoked religious condemnation upon them. In one recorded exchange, he said words that would be quoted in every piece of reporting about this case for the next decade: that the devil should defecate on their graves. His daughters, whom he had murdered, whom he had submerged in a locked car, in a canal lock, he wished them damnation. He expressed no remorse. He expressed no grief. He expressed satisfaction that they had been, in his words, eliminated before they could bring further dishonor. Tooba Muhammad Yahya, his second wife and the children's mother, was recorded in similar conversations, not resisting, not horrified, but complicit. Hamed, the son, spoke in ways consistent with having participated. The wiretaps were not peripheral evidence. They were the spine of the Crown's case. Combined with the laptop search history, the forensic evidence at the lock, the cell phone tower ping, and the testimony of school officials and social workers who documented the girls' cries for help, the prosecution built a case that the jury found, after 15 hours of deliberation, to be overwhelming. The trial of Mohammad Shafia, Tooba Muhammad Yahya, and Mohammad Shafia began in Kingston, Ontario on October 20th, 2011. It ran for nearly 4 months. On January 29th, 2012, the jury returned its verdict. Guilty. All 3 defendants. All 4 counts of first-degree murder. All 4 victims. In Canada, a conviction for first-degree murder carries an automatic sentence of life imprisonment, with no eligibility for parole for 25 years. Justice Robert Maringer, delivering sentencing, addressed the 3 convicted killers directly. He told them that their crimes were rooted in a repugnant, murderous concept, the concept that a man has the right to kill members of his own family for behaving in ways that failed to meet his standard of honor. He told them that concept had no place in Canada. Mohammad Shafia, who had called his daughters whores in recorded conversations, sat and received the sentence. Mohammad Shafia filed appeals. They were dismissed by the Ontario Court of Appeal. He applied to the Supreme Court of Canada for leave to appeal. That application was denied. The conviction stood. All 3 remained incarcerated. The community of Afghan Canadians, which had watched this trial with profound and complicated attention, was left to reckon with what it meant. The way a case of this magnitude was both a tragedy specific to one family and a moment that demanded a broader conversation about the violence that honor-based frameworks can enable, and about whether Canada's institutions had failed these girls long before that June night. The convictions gave the families of Zainab, Sahar, Geeti, and Rona a legal resolution. They did not answer the harder questions. At multiple points in the years before the murders, Canadian institutions had contact with the people in this story and did not intervene. Guidance counselors at the school received disclosures from Zainab about the control her father exercised over her. The notes were made. No escalation followed. Social workers had documented contact with Geeti Shafia, a 13-year-old girl who explicitly asked, in those contacts, to be removed from her home and placed in foster care. The notes were made. No removal was ordered. Rona Amir Mohammad had entered Canada on a visa controlled by her abuser. Her passport was in his possession. She had no legal status independent of his goodwill. There was no mechanism, none, by which she could have accessed the services that might have helped her without his knowledge and permission. She wrote in her diary that she was afraid. She wrote that she had no rights. She wrote those words in a diary that was found after she was dead. The question that those facts demand is not whether the justice system ultimately worked. It did. 3 people were convicted of 4 murders, and they are in prison. The question is about the 18 months, the 2 years, the decade before that canal, the years when Geeti was in classrooms asking for help, when Zainab was telling counselors about her life, when Rona was keeping a diary because there was nothing else she could do. The question is what a different answer from any one of those institutions might have meant for 4 women whose names we would otherwise never need to know. Rona Amir Mohammad was 52 years old. She had come to this country with no documents of her own and no legal standing, because the man who held her documents had arranged it that way. She is buried in Canada. She spent years writing her fears in a diary that was discovered after her death. She deserved to be found before it was too late. Zainab Shafia was 19. She had a boyfriend. She wanted to go to school. She told a guidance counselor she was afraid. She deserved to be believed. Sahar Shafia was 17. She had photographs of herself smiling on her phone. She was a teenager in Montreal, trying to build a life. She deserved to build it. Geeti Shafia was 13. She sat across from social workers and teachers and told them she wanted to leave her family. She asked, in clear and documented language, for help. She was 13 years old, and she was asking. She deserved to be heard. These are the stories that deserved to be told before June 30th, 2009. They were not. We are telling them now. Mohammad Shafia, Tooba Mohammad Yahya, and Mohammad Shafia remain incarcerated. As of 2026, none have been granted parole. Subscribe to Archived Truth. These are the cases that deserve to be remembered. Not for how they ended, but for what they tell us about the systems we trust to protect people before it is too late.